We heard you bought a luxury villa in the Alps. We came to live with you and make peace, my daughter-in-law announced at my door, already shoving her luggage inside. I hadn't blocked them, but the second they stepped into the main hall, they stopped dead, stunned by what they saw. I'm glad you're here. Stay with my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. I was placing the last wildflowers in the main hall when a car engine echoed through the Alpine valley. The sound sliced into the quiet afternoon, sharp, unwelcome. I paused with purple lupines still in my hands and listened as the vehicle climbed the winding gravel road toward my sanctuary. No one was supposed to come today. The women staying at the center had gone into town for their weekly therapy session, and I treasured these peaceful Saturday afternoons, just flowers, mountain air, and silence. At 59, I'd finally learned what solitude was worth. The engine grew louder. Through the tall windows, I saw a sleek black sedan taking the final curve. My stomach tightened with a dread I couldn't immediately explain. Something about that car, about the way it moved with effortless entitlement, set every nerve on edge. I set the flowers down and smoothed my cotton dress. Powder blue, the same one I'd worn to my divorce proceedings 15 years earlier. It felt like armor now, as if my body had chosen it for a reason. The doors shut with expensive, heavy thuds. 2 sets of footsteps crunched across the gravel, purposeful and familiar. I recognized the rhythm before I even saw their faces. Preston's controlled stride, the one he'd inherited from his father, and beside it the sharp click of designer heels that could only belong to Evangeline. My son and daughter-in-law had found me. The doorbell chimed its gentle melody. The tune that usually welcomed women arriving here shattered and afraid. How ironic that it now announced the 2 people I'd spent 4 years trying to escape. I inhaled the lavender-scented air of my haven and walked to the door. My hand hovered over the brass handle. I could pretend I wasn't home. I could slip out the back and vanish into the mountain trails until they gave up. But I was done running, done shrinking, done being their convenient target. I opened the door. "Hello, Mother," Preston said, his voice coated in that familiar mix of condescension and fake warmth that always made my skin crawl. At 34, he was the polished replica of his father, tall, imposing, with steel-gray eyes that never looked at me as anything more than an inconvenience. Evangeline stood beside him like a porcelain doll brought to life, sharp angles, calculated beauty. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, glossy style, and her red lips curved into something that might have passed for a smile if there had been any warmth behind it. "Annette," she said, my name sliding off her tongue like poison. She never called me Mom. From the start of her marriage to Preston, she'd made it clear I didn't deserve that kind of courtesy. "We heard you bought a luxury villa in the Alps," Evangeline continued, already looking past me into the house with open approval. "We came to live with you and make peace." Before I could answer, before I could even fully absorb the audacity, they moved. Preston lifted 2 large designer suitcases. Evangeline brushed past me into the entryway, her heels striking the hardwood like a countdown. "Make peace," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. For 4 years I had tried to make peace. I'd endured their snide comments about my modest apartment, their criticism of my work, their constant hints that I was a burden on their perfect life. I'd smiled through dinners where Evangeline introduced me as Preston's mother, the one who never quite got it together. I swallowed my hurt when they forgot my birthday, ignored my calls, and treated me like an embarrassing obligation. And now that I'd finally built something good for myself, they wanted peace. "Don't just stand there, Mother," Preston said as he maneuvered the suitcases inside. "Help with the luggage. This mountain air must be slowing you down." I stepped aside, not to help, but because shock pinned me in place. They moved through my sanctuary like conquerors claiming new territory, their expensive clothes and entitlement as out of place as wolves in a flower garden. Preston rolled his suitcase toward the main hall, Evangeline close behind, her gaze taking inventory of every detail. My heart pounded hard against my ribs, and I wondered if this was what a deer felt like in the second before the hunter fired. They reached the archway into the main hall, the heart of everything I'd built, where I'd spent countless hours listening to women tell their stories of survival and healing. Preston stepped through first, his mouth already forming some cutting remark about my decor or the simplicity of the space. Then he stopped. Evangeline froze half a step behind him. For one brief moment, her flawless mask cracked, revealing something raw, confusion, maybe shock. They stood there, motionless, staring at the wall that dominated the hall. A wall I had covered with photographs, dozens upon dozens arranged in careful rows like a gallery. But not the photos they expected. Not pictures of Preston's childhood or staged holidays or forced family smiles. These were photos of my real family, the women who came through these doors seeking shelter and found a mother instead. Maria, the young single mother who arrived 6 months ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and a baby in her arms. Sarah, the grandmother whose own children had drained her bank accounts until all she had left was debt and humiliation. Rebecca, the middle-aged teacher whose husband had dictated every detail of her existence for 20 years before she finally found the strength to walk away. They were all there on my wall. Laughing around the kitchen table, digging in the garden, blowing out candles on homemade cakes, celebrating tiny victories most people would never notice. In every picture, I was there too. An arm around a shoulder, a hand on a back, my face lit with a joy that was completely real. These were the faces of the family I had chosen, the daughters of my heart who had chosen me right back. "What is this?" Evangeline muttered, her voice strained, caught between confusion and disgust. "Is this—" Preston turned toward me, gray eyes narrowed, suspicion cutting through his expression. "Mother, who are these people?" I stepped fully into the hall behind them, feeling my spine lengthen with each step. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small in front of them. I felt rooted. This was my space, my refuge, wrapped in proof of the life I had created without their permission. "These are my daughters," I said. The sentence hung between us like a drawn line on the ground. Preston's face darkened, and Evangeline's perfectly shaped brows pulled into a deep frown. "Your daughters?" Preston echoed, his voice sharpening with outrage. "What the hell does that mean? I'm your only child." I looked at him, really looked. Not at the little boy I once cradled through fevers and nightmares, but at the man standing there now. A man who, in 34 years, had never once looked at me with the warmth and gratitude I saw shining from the eyes in those photographs. "You're my son," I answered softly, "but you haven't been my child for a very long time." Evangeline sucked in a sharp breath that echoed against the high ceiling. She turned on me, fury tightening her features, her red lips pressed into a harsh line. "How dare you?" she spat. "How dare you replace your own family with these strangers?" But I was no longer listening to her. My gaze drifted back to the wall. Those faces, those moments, those women who had arrived broken and left standing taller. I remembered why I had come here, why I had walked away from everything safe and familiar to start over in this mountain valley. I had come to save myself. And in learning to do that, I had learned how to help others save themselves too. Preston and Evangeline could drag their suitcases in, along with their expectations, their demands, their poisonous entitlement. They could try to take over this house the way they had once tried to take over my life, but they couldn't erase what I had built. They couldn't rip away the family I had chosen. They couldn't touch the love I had earned or the peace I had fought for. Not anymore. "I think," I said, my voice level and clear, "we need to talk." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Preston stood stiffly in the middle of the main hall, his tailored suit absurdly out of place among mismatched armchairs, handmade quilts, and vases full of wildflowers. Evangeline had stationed herself near the fireplace, one manicured hand resting on the mantel as though she were staking a claim. "Talk about what exactly?" she snapped. Her voice sliced through the quiet like broken glass. About how you've been playing out some fantasy up here while ignoring your real family? That old tightness rose in my chest, the familiar constriction I'd felt 1,000 times in their presence. The feeling that I was somehow wrong, lacking, never enough, always failing some invisible test I didn't understand. But this time, something inside me held firm. This time, I was standing in the home I'd created with my own hands, surrounded by proof that my life mattered, that my existence had value beyond their judgment. My real family, I repeated slowly, tasting each word. Then I turned to Preston. Tell me, when was the last time you called me? Not because you needed something, not because it was a holiday, just because you wanted to hear my voice. His jaw clenched. I don't have time for emotional manipulation, Mother, he said. Evangeline and I have had a hard year. My business has been struggling. We thought it would be good for all of us to spend some time together. Struggling? I asked quietly, pieces sliding into place. That's what you're calling it? Evangeline shot him a quick warning glance, but Preston kept going, words tumbling out with the careless assurance of a man who had never truly gone without. The real estate market is brutal right now, he said. We've had to make some cuts. Downsize the house, let the housekeeper go. It's been stressful. When we heard you'd bought this place, we thought, well, the timing was perfect. Perfect timing. I almost laughed. They had ignored me for 4 years, treated me like a shameful footnote, made it crystal clear that my presence in their lives was barely tolerable. And now, the moment they needed something, here they were, with luggage, with rehearsed speeches, talking about peace. How did you find me? I asked. Your old neighbor, Evangeline replied, smugness gleaming in her eyes. Mrs. Chen. She was very talkative about your sudden good fortune. A villa in the Swiss Alps, she added, savoring the words. Quite an achievement for someone who spent her life as a nurse. She said nurse as if it were a stain, something common, small, unworthy. It was the same tone she had always used when talking about my job, my decisions, my entire existence. I worked as a nurse for 37 years, I said. My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. I saved lives. I held the hands of dying patients so they wouldn't be alone. I helped bring new lives into the world. I'm proud of that. Of course you are, Evangeline replied, her voice syrupy with contempt. And now you get to play house with all these random women. How fulfilling for you, Evangeline sneered, flicking her hand toward the wall of photographs. In one frame, Maria smiled at the camera, her 6-month-old daughter cradled in her arms. In another, Sarah knelt in the garden, hands deep in the soil, her face lit with quiet pride. Every picture was a story, of healing, of women piecing themselves back together after being shattered by the very people who were supposed to love them. They're not random women, I said, my voice growing steadier. They're survivors. They've been through hell, and they're rebuilding their lives, just like I was rebuilding mine. Was rebuilding? Preston cut in, immediately catching the past tense. What does that mean? I looked at him. This man who had my DNA but felt like a stranger, and made a choice. They had barged into my sanctuary demanding the truth. Fine, they would get it. It means I'm done rebuilding, I said. I've built something beautiful here. Something meaningful, something that has nothing to do with either of you. Color surged into Preston's face. What the hell is that supposed to mean? It means that for the last 4 years, I've been learning what it feels like to be appreciated, to be needed, not for my money, not for my ability to absorb abuse, but for who I am. I glanced back at the photos, my heart warm with love for every woman on that wall. Maria was 19 when she arrived, I continued, pregnant and homeless because her parents threw her out after she refused to marry the man who assaulted her. Her English was shaky. She was terrified of everything. I taught her how to cook American food, helped her practice her English, held her hand while she was in labor. She calls me abuela now, grandmother. Evangeline rolled her eyes. How touching. But I wasn't finished. Sarah's children stole her retirement savings and dumped her in a state nursing home when she couldn't pay her mortgage anymore. When she came here, she was suicidal. Now she runs our garden program and teaches the younger women about money, so they'll never have to depend on anyone the way she depended on her kids." "Mother, this is all very interesting," Preston interrupted, "but I still don't see what it has to do with us. We're here to reconnect as a family." "Reconnect," I repeated. "When were we ever truly connected, Preston? Not just sharing a last name or sitting through obligatory holidays. Actually connected?" He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence that followed was heavy with all the years we had spent pretending that was enough. "You want the truth?" I said. "Here it is. You and your wife have treated me like garbage for years. You've made it clear I embarrass you. You've acted like my life is small and pathetic, like I'm a burden you're forced to carry." I could feel my voice rising, 30 years of swallowed words finally burning their way out. "And I accepted it," I admitted. "I told myself that family was family, that blood mattered more than the way you actually treated me." I looked back at the photographs, the women laughing, hugging, working side by side. But these women taught me something. They taught me that family isn't about DNA or legal ties. It's about love, respect, mutual support. It's about showing up for each other, not just when it's convenient, but when it's hard. It's about seeing the best in each other instead of constantly picking apart every flaw. "Oh, please," Evangeline snapped. "Spare us the inspirational speech. You're delusional if you think these charity cases are your real family." "Charity cases?" The phrase hit me like a slap. "Is that what you think they are? That these women are somehow less than you? Aren't they?" She shot back. "Homeless women, addicts, abuse victims. What exactly do they bring to your life besides giving you an excuse to feel important?" I stared at her, this woman who had married into my family and slowly poisoned my relationship with my son, a woman who measured human worth in bank balances and social status, who saw kindness as weakness and compassion as stupidity. "They bring everything," I said quietly. "They bring honesty, gratitude, love without conditions. They share their stories, their strength, their hope. They give me the kind of family bond you can't buy and you can't inherit. You have to earn it." I walked closer to the wall, fingertips brushing a frame that held a photo of all of us together last Christmas. We'd cooked dinner from scratch, sung carols around the piano, exchanged handmade gifts. It had been the most beautiful Christmas of my entire life. "You want to know why I never told you about this place?" I asked, turning back to them. "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this, with judgment, with contempt, completely unable to understand why anyone would choose love over luxury." Preston's expression twisted with anger. "So what are you saying? That we're not welcome here? That you're choosing these strangers over your own son?" "I'm saying you made your choice about our relationship a long time ago," I replied. "You chose to see me as a burden instead of a blessing. You chose criticism over compassion, judgment over empathy. And now you show up, needing something, and expect me to pretend none of that ever happened." Evangeline pushed herself away from the mantel, eyes blazing. "You're being ridiculous, Annette. We came here to rebuild our relationship, and you're throwing it back in our faces because of some misguided martyr complex." "Martyrdom?" I laughed once, a sharp, humorless sound. "You think this is martyrdom? This is freedom." I took a breath that felt like it came from deep in my bones. For the first time in my adult life, I'm surrounded by people who value me for me, not for what I can do for them. The truth was pouring out of me now, unstoppable. Years of trying to be enough, of settling for crumbs and calling it love. "You want to stay here?" I said. "Fine. But you need to understand something." I gestured around the room. "This is not a luxury villa where you get to hide from your problems and expect me to wait on you. This is a recovery center for women who have been abused, neglected, and abandoned by their families." I watched Preston's expression shift. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed almost immediately by something close to horror. "You don't live in a luxury villa at all, do you?" he asked slowly. I smiled, and for the first time since they'd arrived, I felt utterly at ease. "No, Preston, I don't." The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Even Evangeline's flawless makeup couldn't mask the shock that flashed across her features before she forced it back under control. But I'd seen it. That sharp, unfiltered flicker of panic. "What do you mean you don't live in a luxury villa?" Preston's voice cracked on the last word. I walked over to the tall windows that overlooked the valley, where the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the meadow. From here you could see the small cabins scattered over the property, each one a refuge for a woman piecing her life back together. "I mean exactly what I said," I replied. "This isn't my private home, Preston. This is Haven Springs Recovery Center. I founded it 3 years ago with my life savings and I'm still paying it off." The silence behind me was so complete that the soft ticking of the grandfather clock sounded deafening. At last, Evangeline spoke. "Recovery center for what?" she asked, her voice strained, as if she already suspected the answer, but desperately hoped she was wrong. I turned back to them, these two people who had driven 4 hours up the mountain expecting marble floors and infinity pools, and instead had walked straight into something they could neither control nor easily dismiss. "For women escaping domestic violence," I said, "for mothers who lost everything defending their children, for older women whose own families bled them dry and then threw them away when the money was gone." I paused, letting the words sink in. "For women like me who spent decades being told we were never enough, never smart enough, important enough, worthy enough to deserve basic respect." Preston collapsed into one of the mismatched but comfortable armchairs we used for group sessions. His expensive suit looked absurd against the hand-knit cushions, like a snake trying to curl up in a flower bed. "But Mrs. Chen said you had money," he mumbled. "She said you bought a villa." "I did buy this property," I said, "for $300,000. That was every cent I'd saved in 37 years as a nurse, every overtime shift, every holiday shift, every time I skipped something small for myself because I told myself I was saving for the future." The irony pressed against my chest, but it didn't hurt the way it used to. "All those years," I went on, "I told myself I was being responsible, saving for your education, for your wedding, for the grandchildren I dreamed of spoiling one day, and in the end, I finally used that money for something else, for me, for this." "300,000? Evangeline whispered. "That's it?" The raw disappointment in her tone might once have broken my heart. Now it only confirmed what I already knew about why they were really here. "Sorry it's not the jackpot you were hoping for," I said calmly. "I know you probably imagined something larger." "That's not—" "We didn't come here for money," Preston protested, the words rushing out too fast, too defensive. Meanwhile, Evangeline's face had gone a sickly pale beneath her foundation, the blush on her cheeks suddenly looking like war paint. "Of course you did," I replied, and for the first time in years I felt completely steady in front of them. "The only question is, how bad is it?" Preston's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Evangeline shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass, but it was too late. The truth was written all over him. "We're not in trouble," she said quickly. "We've just hit a rough patch. Real estate is cyclical. We figured it would be nice to spend some time with family while things recover." Family. The word sounded wrong coming from her. In 8 years of marriage to my son, she had made sure I understood I was not included in that category. I was baggage. An inconvenient reminder of where he came from. "How much do you owe?" I asked. "Mother, that's inappropriate," Preston said sharply. "Inappropriate?" I echoed. "You arrive at my door without warning, with enough luggage for a long stay, talking about making peace after years of treating me like an embarrassment, and my question is inappropriate?" I stepped closer to him. This man whose forehead I had cooled with damp cloths, whose nightmares I had soothed away. When had he become such a stranger? "I spent 15 years married to your father," I said quietly. "I know what desperation looks like. I know exactly how it feels to have creditors calling, to lie awake worrying about bills you can't pay, to paste on a smile and pretend everything is fine while your life falls apart." Preston's face crumpled, just for a moment, And beneath the grown man, I glimpsed the frightened little boy he used to be. 53,000, he whispered. We owe 53,000. In what? I asked. Credit cards? Loans? Credit card debt, business loans? Evangeline answered, her voice tight. And some personal loans. The business hasn't turned a profit in 18 months. We've been living on credit, waiting for things to improve. A familiar ache stirred in my chest, that old instinct to fix it, to rescue, to shoulder the burden for them. But I was older now, and I had learned the hard way where that road led. So, you decided to come here and what? I said. Move in with me until you got back on your feet? Live off my generosity while you waited for a miracle? We thought we could help each other, Preston said, sounding more confident as he wove his story. You're getting older, living alone out here. We thought we could offer companionship, help with maintenance, maybe contribute to expenses. Contribute to expenses, I repeated. With what money? The question drifted between us like smoke. Outside, through the big windows, I could see Sarah in the garden, showing 2 new residents how to plant herb seedlings. At 68, her hair gleamed silver in the sunlight, her face lined with the kind of laughter that can only be born after devastation. She had survived her children's betrayal and still found a way to grow joy out of the rubble. You know what the difference is between you and the women who live here? I asked, my voice soft but unshakable. They're honest about where they stand. They don't arrive with elaborate stories about wanting family time and helping each other. I remembered the way our residents introduced themselves on intake days, eyes red, hands shaking. They say, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing left. I need help. That's what they say, I continued. They ask instead of demanding. They're grateful, not entitled. Evangeline's composure finally cracked. Entitled! She snapped. How dare you? We're your family. Are you? I turned to face her fully. Because family doesn't disappear for months and then reappear only when they need something. Family doesn't mock someone's job or living situation. Family doesn't treat holiday visits like unpleasant chores to endure. We've been busy, Preston protested weakly. Too busy to call. Too busy to write. Too busy to remember my birthday 3 years in a row, but not too busy to Google my address and drive 4 hours when you thought I might have something you could use. The truth settled over the room like dust after an explosion. All the talk of reconciliation and family bonds evaporated, leaving only the raw reality beneath. You know what the saddest part is? I asked softly, looking at Preston with genuine sorrow. I would have helped you 3 months ago if you'd called and told me the truth. If you'd asked for help instead of showing up to take it, I would have found a way. You would have. There was a flicker of hope in his eyes. I would have cashed out my emergency fund. I could have given you 15, maybe 20,000, enough to stabilize things while you worked out an actual plan. I heard the sharp breath Evangeline drew in. She was doing the math. 15,000 wouldn't fix everything, but it would have bought them time. But you didn't ask, I said. You assumed. You plotted. You drove up here expecting to move into what you thought was my luxury villa and live off my success without ever acknowledging your failures or even asking my permission. Outside, Maria stepped out of one of the cabins, her baby balanced on her hip. She waved to Sarah in the garden and shouted something that made the older woman laugh. This was what family looked like. People choosing each other. People building joy out of almost nothing. The women here work for what they receive, I said, turning back to Preston and Evangeline. They help with cooking, cleaning, childcare. They go to counseling, attend life skills workshops, contribute however they can. Some have been here 6 months, some over a year. They stay as long as they need to, as long as they're working toward independence. Are you offering us the same deal? Evangeline asked, her voice edged with suspicion. I studied her face, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, who measured her value by her husband's income and her social circle. Could she empty bedpans for elderly guests? Sit beside a sobbing stranger and offer comfort without judgment? Plant vegetables and feel pride in feeding people who had nothing? I'm offering you a choice, I said at last. You can stay here and join the program like everyone else. You'll share a cabin, help with daily chores, attend group sessions on finances and healthy relationships. You'll work toward a plan for independence that doesn't involve expecting other people to rescue you. The offer hung between us like a narrow bridge neither of them wanted to cross. Preston looked at Evangeline, clearly waiting for her lead. She stared at me with open horror and disbelief. Or, I continued, you can leave, right now. Drive back down the mountain and figure out your own solution to your own problems. That's it? Preston's voice cracked. Those are our only options? Those are your only options here, I corrected. What you do afterward is up to you. The grandfather clock chimed 4 times, another hour gone from a day that had begun in peace. Soon the women would be back from their therapy session, and we'd gather in the kitchen to cook dinner together. It was my favorite time of day, the chopping, the laughter, the quiet sense of belonging that came from being genuinely needed. Preston and Evangeline could be part of that if they chose. They could learn what it meant to contribute instead of consume, to earn love instead of demanding it, to find purpose in service instead of status. But looking at their faces, the disgust, the entitlement, I already knew what their decision would be. We need time to think, Evangeline said finally. Of course, I replied. Take all the time you need. Just remember, this is a working recovery center, not a hotel. If you stay tonight, you'll help with dinner and cleanup. Breakfast is at 7, and everyone contributes. As if on cue, the distant sound of car doors echoed across the valley. The women were back, their voices floating on the mountain air as they climbed out of the van. Preston and Evangeline turned toward the windows, watching 6 women of different ages walk toward the main building. They moved like people who belonged, comfortable, grounded, home. Think carefully about your choice, I told my son and his wife, because whatever you decide, it will change everything. The voices outside grew louder. Overlapping conversations, laughter, the familiar music of my new life. I saw Preston and Evangeline tense as the group approached, their discomfort almost tangible as they realized they were about to meet the people I now called family. The front door opened with a soft creak. Shoes were kicked off, bags set down, greetings exchanged. The sound of home. "Annette?" Maria's voice called in accented English. "We brought you something from the market." Before I could answer, she appeared in the archway of the main hall, her 18-month-old daughter Elena perched on her hip. Maria's face shone with the kind of quiet happiness I had almost never seen in my years with Preston and Evangeline, the joy of someone who had finally found safety. She stopped when she noticed my guests. Her smile faltered as her eyes took in their expensive clothing and cold expressions. "Oh," she murmured, shifting Elena protectively to her other hip. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you had company." "It's fine, sweetheart," I said, walking toward her with the open affection I had learned to give freely here. "Maria, this is my son, Preston, and his wife, Evangeline. They've come for a visit." Maria's face lit up immediately, as it always did when she believed something good was happening for someone she loved. "Your son? How wonderful!" she said. "You must be so happy to see him." She turned to Preston with sincere warmth. "Annette talks about you all the time. She is so proud of you." Heat crawled into my cheeks. It was true. In those early months at Haven Springs, I had spoken of Preston often, sharing stories from his childhood, voicing my hope that one day we might mend what was broken. Maria didn't know about the years of distance, the cutting remarks, the slow erosion of respect. Preston's response was exactly what I had feared. "I'm sure she does," he said flatly. He didn't get up, didn't offer his hand, didn't acknowledge Elena at all. Instead, he let his eyes skim over Maria, her thrift store sweater, her worn jeans, her calloused hands, her accent, in one long, dismissive glance. Maria's smile trembled, uncertainty darkening her eyes. She was 21 and had already seen enough cruelty to recognize it the second it appeared. "Preston," I said sharply, but he was already talking. "Mother's been playing house up here, I see. he said to Evangeline, loud enough for Maria to hear every word. Very charitable of her to take in strays. Strays. The word hit Maria like a physical blow. I watched her face fall, watched her instinctively pull Elena closer, cradling her against her chest. In that instant, she wasn't the resilient young mother who had survived assault and homelessness. She was just a girl being reminded that some people would always see her as less than human. "How dare you?" I whispered, my voice trembling with rage. Before I could say anything more, Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Maria. At 68, she had survived her own children's financial abuse and abandonment, had stood on the edge of suicide before finding refuge here. She was small in stature but fierce in spirit, and one look at Maria's expression told her everything she needed to know. "Is there a problem here?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "No problem at all," Evangeline replied with fake sweetness. "We're just getting acquainted with Annette's house guests." House guests. Another deliberate downgrade. Another way to reduce these women to their circumstances instead of seeing them as the survivors they are. Maria murmured something in Spanish and hurried out of the room, Elena's confused little whimpers trailing behind her down the hallway. Sarah watched them go, then turned back to us, her eyes hard as steel. 30 years, she said in a conversational tone. "That's how long I let my children treat me like garbage, making jokes about my intelligence, rolling their eyes when I spoke, acting like I was a burden they were forced to carry. You know what I learned in those 30 years?" She stepped fully into the room, and her small frame seemed to expand with righteous anger. "I learned that some people are only happy when they're making someone else feel small, and I learned that the people who do that to you are not your family, no matter what their birth certificate says." Preston finally lurched to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "I don't know who you think you are, lady," he snapped, "but you have no right to lecture me about my relationship with my mother." "Don't I?" Sarah replied calmly. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you just made a sweet girl cry to establish your superiority. It looks like you walked into Annette's home and immediately started judging and dismissing the people she loves. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of son you are." "What kind of son I am?" Preston's voice rose. "I'm the son who put up with her dramatic nonsense for years. I'm the son who included her in family events even when she embarrassed us. I'm the son who drove 4 hours to try to have a relationship with her, only to find out she's been wasting her money on charity cases instead of thinking about her real family's future." The words spilled out of him like poison from a long-infected wound, exposing every ugly, festering thought he'd kept buried. With each sentence, I felt the last fragile threads of love I'd been clinging to finally snap. "Charity cases," Sarah repeated slowly. "Is that what you think we are?" By then, the commotion had drawn others. Rebecca appeared beside Sarah, her teacher's instincts kicking in as she sized up the situation. Behind her, 2 more residents hovered in the hallway, their faces tight with the wary look of women who knew too well what it meant to be on the receiving end of cruelty. "Let me tell you about charity cases," Rebecca said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 20 years educating children. "Mia speaks 3 languages and was 2 semesters away from finishing her nursing degree when her ex-boyfriend started stalking her. She's been taking online classes while caring for her daughter and working in our garden program. Next month, she starts a paid internship at the community clinic." She nodded toward Sarah. Sarah built a successful catering business from nothing and ran it for 15 years before her children convinced her she was too old to manage her own finances. Now she teaches our financial literacy workshops and has helped 3 women start their own small businesses. Preston and Evangeline were both staring now, clearly unsettled by the reality of the women they'd dismissed as beneath them. "And I," Rebecca went on, "spent 20 years as an award-winning high school principal before my husband convinced me I was worthless, stupid, incapable of surviving on my own. I believed him for so long that when I finally left, I didn't even know how to write a check or use an ATM." She glanced at Sarah. "Sarah taught me. Maria helped me practice my Spanish so I could talk to parents who didn't speak English. Annette held my hand through panic attacks and reminded me every single day that I was worth saving. Rebecca took a step closer to Preston, and I was reminded that she had spent decades dealing with entitled teenagers and their even more entitled parents. "So when you call us charity cases," she said quietly, "you're calling your mother a fool. You're insulting her for seeing our potential when no one else would. You're dismissing not just us, but her judgment, her compassion, her ability to recognize strength in broken people." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock and Elena's faint crying somewhere down the hall. Evangeline's face had gone chalk white beneath her makeup. Preston looked like he was struggling to draw breath. "This is ridiculous," Evangeline finally exploded. "We didn't come here to be lectured by a bunch of—" "A bunch of what?" I asked softly. "Finish the sentence, Evangeline." "A bunch of what?" But she couldn't say it. The words caught in her throat. Instead, she turned on Preston with the fury of someone whose carefully constructed plans had just collapsed. "This is your fault," Evangeline hissed at Preston. "You told me she had money. You said she was living in luxury. You made me believe this would fix everything." "I thought it would," Preston shot back. "How was I supposed to know she'd gone crazy and turned into some kind of saint?" "Saint?" He said it like an insult. Like compassion was a mental illness, like choosing to help others meant something was wrong with me. "I think," Sarah said in a mild, almost chatty tone, "that it's time for you to leave." "You don't get to tell us to leave," Preston snapped. "This is my mother's house." "No," I said, my voice slicing through the room like a knife. "This is my house, my center, my sanctuary, and I'm telling you to leave." The words dropped into the silence like stones hitting deep water. Preston's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to pure rage. "You're choosing them over me?" he demanded, his voice cracking. "Your own son?" I looked at him, truly looked, and saw not the little boy I'd once soothed and protected, but the man he had decided to be. A man who could make a young mother cry just to feel powerful. A man who walked into a space built for healing and immediately tried to tear it apart. A man who measured his worth by how small he could make everyone else feel. "I'm choosing love over cruelty," I said quietly. "I'm choosing respect over entitlement. I'm choosing the family that chose me back." Preston's features twisted, not with grief, but with white-hot fury at being denied what he believed he was owed. "You'll regret this," he said, low and threatening. "We drove all this way to give you another chance, and you're throwing it away for these people. When you're old and sick and alone, don't expect us to come running." His words hung in the air like smoke from a long, ugly fire. But instead of fear, something else rose inside me. Relief. The performance was over. The illusion that we were a loving, close family had finally been laid to rest. "I won't be alone," I replied softly. "I will never be alone again." As if to prove it, I felt a small hand slip into mine. Maria had come back, her cheeks still streaked with dried tears, but her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Elena perched on her other hip, reaching curiously for the colorful scarf around Sarah's neck. One by one, the other women stepped closer. Not crowding, not aggressive, just present, steady, standing with me, looking at them. Maria's fierce courage, Sarah's protective fire, Rebecca's quiet resolve. I understood that Preston had been wrong. This wasn't the moment my family ended. This was the moment it truly began. The silence stretched out, tight as a wire ready to snap. Preston stood rigid in the middle of my sanctuary, his expression cycling through emotions I'd never seen on him before: shock, rage, and something that might have been fear. Evangeline clutched her designer purse like a shield, her knuckles white against the leather. Around me, my chosen family held their ground. Maria's hand stayed firmly in mine, her presence a living reminder of everything I'd built here. Sarah crossed her arms, her lined face set with unwavering determination. Rebecca instinctively positioned herself slightly ahead of the others, the protective stance of a lifelong educator guarding her students. "You can't be serious," Preston whispered at last, disbelief burning through his voice. "You're actually choosing these strangers over your own blood?" Blood doesn't make family, Sarah said softly, her words heavy with 68 years of hard-earned truth. Love does. Respect does. Showing up when it matters does. That's what makes a family. Preston spun on her, his face twisted with rage. Nobody asked you, old woman. This is between me and my mother. The insult hit Sarah like a slap. I saw her flinch, saw the hurt flash in her eyes before she could cover it. She had been called worse, especially by her own children, but it still cut deep. Something inside me finally snapped. Not the slow, jagged breaking that had happened over years of cruelty and disappointment, but a clean, decisive break, a chain giving way at last. Get out, I said. My voice was flat, deadly calm. Preston blinked. What? I said, get out. Now, both of you. Mother, you can't be. I can, I replied. And I am. I stepped forward, still holding tightly to Maria's hand, drawing strength from her and from the women at my back. You have exactly 5 minutes to collect your things and leave my property. Evangeline finally found her voice, though it came out high, sharp, and panicked. You're making a huge mistake, Annette. We came here to help you, to be a family, and you're throwing it away for these people who are just using you. Using me? I almost laughed. Maria gets up at 5 every morning to help prepare breakfast. She's learned to preserve vegetables from our garden so we have food for winter. She reads aloud to the elderly woman in cabin 3 because her eyesight is failing. Tell me, how exactly is she using me? She's homeless, Evangeline snapped. She has nowhere else to go. Of course she's going to act grateful and helpful. What choice does she have? Maria's grip tightened around my fingers, but when I looked at her face, I didn't see hurt. I saw pity. Pity for a woman who genuinely didn't understand that gratitude could be real, that kindness could be freely given. You're right, Maria said quietly. Her accent softened her words, turning them almost musical after Evangeline's harshness. I was homeless. I had nowhere to go. She shifted Elena to her other hip. The little girl babbled happily, playing with her mother's necklace, blissfully unaware of the storm around her. But Annette didn't just give me a bed, Maria continued. She gave me hope. She saw something in me I couldn't see in myself. She took a breath, her voice growing stronger. Before I came here, I thought I was broken, used up. That man made me believe I was nothing, but Annette told me every day that I was strong, that I deserved love, that I still had a future. She helped me understand that what happened to me doesn't define me. Maria straightened her shoulders. Next month, I start working at the clinic full-time. In 2 years, I will finish my nursing degree. In 5 years, I want to open my own practice in a community that doesn't have enough doctors, so I can help other women like me. None of that would be possible if Annette hadn't believed in me first. She met Preston's gaze, unflinching. So yes, she said, I needed her help, but she needed mine too. She needed to remember what it feels like to be appreciated, to be valued for who she is and not just what she can give. We saved each other. The truth in her words rang through the room like a bell. This was what Preston and Evangeline could never grasp. Real relationships are built on mutual respect, on each person giving what they can, when they can. That's very touching, Evangeline said, her tone soaked in sarcasm. But we're still family. That has to count for something. Does it? I asked. I looked at Preston, the man I had carried in my body, nursed at my breast, rocked through endless sleepless nights. When was the last time you called just to ask how I was? I asked softly. The last time you remembered my birthday? The last time you told me you loved me and actually meant it? Preston opened his mouth, but no words came out. The questions hung between us like accusations, each one backed by years of silence and indifference. We've been busy, he managed finally. Busy, I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. Too busy to call, but not too busy to drive up here when you thought I had money. Too busy to visit, but not too busy to insult the people I love within 5 minutes of meeting them. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice kind but unyielding. Annette, you don't owe them anything, she said. Some people only understand love as a transaction. What can you do for me? What can you give me? How can you make my life easier? And when you stop being useful, they stop caring." "That's not true," Preston protested, but even he didn't sound convinced. "Isn't it?" Rebecca asked, slipping into that calm, instructive tone she must have used in classrooms for years. "When was the last time you asked about her interests, her health, her happiness? When was the last time you offered to help her with something instead of expecting her to help you?" The questions landed one after another. Preston's face flushed bright red, then drained of color. Beside him, Evangeline shifted uneasily, her perfectly drawn makeup beginning to smear under the strain. "We didn't know she needed help," Evangeline said weakly. "She's always been so independent." "I was independent because I had to be," I said, my voice steady, "because no one else was going to take care of me. But independence doesn't mean you don't need love or support or companionship. It just means you've learned to live without them." Sarah made a soft sound of agreement. She knew that kind of loneliness intimately, the kind that seeps into your bones when strength is your only option. "We could learn," Preston said suddenly, a note of desperation creeping in. "We could do better. We could—" But his words faded as he looked around the room, at the photographs of women who called me Mom, not out of obligation, but affection. At the worn, cozy furniture shaped by years of shared meals and long conversations, at the deep, quiet peace that seemed to breathe from the walls themselves. He finally saw it. He saw everything he had thrown away with his own indifference, his own cruelty. And instead of softening him, the realization seemed to ignite his anger. "This is insane," he snapped, his voice rising. "You're abandoning your real family for a bunch of damaged women who make you feel important. This isn't love, Mother. It's pathology." The word hit me like a blow. Pathology. As if caring for others, as if finding purpose in helping, as if building something beautiful from broken pieces was a sickness instead of a strength. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly. "Maybe there is something wrong with me. Maybe I am damaged, pathological, beyond repair." Preston's eyes lit with triumph, thinking he had finally broken me. "But you know what?" I continued, my voice growing stronger. "I'd rather be broken and surrounded by love than whole, and surrounded by people who only care about what I can do for them." The triumph drained from his face, leaving him hollow. "And if that makes me pathological," I said, glancing at the women standing beside me, "then I'm proud to be sick." Maria squeezed my hand. Sarah nodded, eyes shining with fierce approval. Rebecca smiled the way a teacher does when a student finally understands the lesson that matters most. "Time's up," I told Preston and Evangeline. "Get your bags and go." For a moment I thought Preston might refuse. He stood there trembling with rage and humiliation, fists clenched. Then Evangeline grabbed his arm, her own survival instincts finally outweighing her pride. "Come on," she hissed. "Let's get out of here. This place is crazy anyway." They snatched up their expensive luggage with jerky, furious movements, muttering to each other under their breath. At the door, Preston turned back one last time. "Don't call us when you need help," he spat. "Don't come crawling back when these people move on and leave you with nothing." I looked at him, this stranger wearing my son's face, and felt only sorrow. "I won't," I said simply. The front door slammed behind them, the sound echoing through the house like the closing of a chapter. Through the window, I watched them hurl their bags into the car and speed away, gravel spraying from their tires. As the engine noise faded into the hush of the mountains, I realized tears were sliding down my cheeks. Not from grief, exactly, but from something deeper. Relief. The relief of finally releasing something that had been poisoning me for years. Maria slipped an arm around my waist. Sarah moved to my other side, her worn hand resting gently on my shoulder. Rebecca began picking up the throw pillows scattered during the confrontation, quietly restoring the room to its usual order. "It hurts now," Sarah said softly, her voice full of understanding. "But it gets better," Sarah said softly. "The peace that comes after you stop trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. That peace is worth everything." I nodded, unable to push words past the lump in my throat. Outside, the sun was sinking behind the mountains, washing the sky in gold and rose. It was going to be a beautiful evening, and for the first time in years I would enjoy it without waiting for the phone to ring, without bracing for the next crisis, without that constant low hum of anxiety that came from chasing approval from people who saw me as a resource instead of a human being. "Dinner?" Rebecca asked gently. "Dinner," I agreed, wiping my eyes. "Let's make something special tonight. We have something to celebrate." As we walked toward the kitchen together, my chosen family wrapped me in warmth and acceptance. And in that moment, I understood that Preston had been wrong about something important. These women weren't going to leave me with nothing. They had already given me everything. 2 years have passed since that afternoon when Preston and Evangeline drove away from my sanctuary, their expensive car shrinking down the mountain road like a bad dream dissolving in daylight. I'm 61 now. My hair is more silver than brown. My hands carry the honest calluses of someone who works with earth and purpose, not someone who spends her days behind a desk counting other people's money. This morning, like every morning for the last 730 days, I woke to the sound of laughter drifting in through my bedroom window. Maria was in the garden with Elena, now a chattering 3-year-old who speaks 3 languages and calls me abuela, with the easy affection of a child who has only ever known love. I padded into the kitchen in my robe and slippers, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and fresh bread that anchors our mornings. Rebecca was already there, of course, her teacher's habit of early rising untouched by retirement. She's become our unofficial coordinator, her gift for organization keeping our growing community humming. "Morning," she said, handing me a steaming mug without my needing to ask. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," I said, and for once it was true. The insomnia that had haunted me for decades, the tossing and turning born of worrying whether I was good enough, whether Preston would ever love me the way I deserved, vanished the day I stopped centering my life around his approval. Through the kitchen window, I could see how much Haven Springs had changed in 2 years. We'd grown from 6 cabins to 12, each one a temporary home for women rebuilding their lives after leaving toxic situations. The little herb patch Sarah started now stretches over 2 acres, supplying vegetables for our table and surplus for the local food bank. Sarah herself has become something of a local celebrity. Her financial literacy workshops now draw women from 3 counties. At 70, she moves through our community like a benevolent general, organizing, teaching, and nurturing with the fierce efficiency of someone who finally found her calling. "Any word from the state inspector?" I asked, settling at the table with my coffee. "She'll be here next week for the final review," Rebecca said, eyes bright. "If we pass, and we will, Haven Springs becomes an officially licensed residential facility. That means state funding, insurance reimbursements, the ability to help twice as many women." The thought felt surreal. When I first bought this property with my life savings, my only plan was to create a safe place where broken women could heal. Now we were on the verge of becoming part of the state's domestic violence support network, with a waiting list that stretched for months. "Maria's been accepted into the nurse practitioner program," Rebecca added, unable to hide her pride. "Full scholarship, and they're letting her keep working at the clinic part-time." Warmth spread through my chest. Maria was our first success story, the terrified 19-year-old who had arrived with nothing but a baby and a shattered spirit. Now she's 23, confident and capable, preparing to specialize in trauma-informed care for assault survivors. She'll change lives the way hers was changed. The front door creaked open, followed by footsteps, and Sarah's voice calling, "Annette, you have a visitor!" I frowned, glancing at the clock. 7:30 in the morning was early for visitors, and we weren't expecting any new residents until next week. "I'll be right there," I called, quickly braiding my hair and pulling on a sweater. Rebecca walked with me to the main hall. Sarah stood near the entrance, wearing an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Beside her was a young woman, maybe 25, with dark hair, anxious eyes, and a small overnight bag clutched in one hand. In the other, she held a folded piece of paper. "This is Jennifer," Sarah said gently. "She says someone told her about us, recommended she come." Jennifer looked up at me with the hollow desperation I've seen so many times in the past 2 years. Whatever she'd been through had left her worn thin, like paper folded and refolded too many times. "Who recommended us?" I asked softly. Her mouth worked for a moment before any sound came out. Then, with shaking hands, she held out the folded paper. "A woman at the emergency room," she said. "She said you might be able to help me." I took the paper and unfolded it. At the top was the letterhead of St. Mary's Hospital downtown. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, was a note. "Please contact Haven Springs Recovery Center. Tell them Dr. Maria Valdez sent you. They saved my life. They can save yours, too. M." My breath caught. Dr. Maria Valdez. Maria had finished her nursing degree 6 months earlier and now worked in the hospital ER while studying for her nurse practitioner certification. She was using her job to help other women find their way to safety, extending the reach of our little sanctuary far beyond the mountains. "Dr. Valdez," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we know her very well, Jennifer. Welcome to Haven Springs." The relief that washed over Jennifer's face was worth every sleepless night, every dollar spent, every moment of doubt I'd had while building this place. As Rebecca guided Jennifer toward the intake office, my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen and felt my heart stutter. Preston. For 2 years, he had honored my boundary. No calls, no emails, no surprise visits. Just blessed, healing silence. Silence that had given me space to grow without his constant negativity dragging me down. I hesitated, then opened the message. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need you to know something. Evangeline and I are getting divorced. I've been in therapy for 6 months trying to understand why everything in my life keeps falling apart. I think I finally do. I was wrong about everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness or for you to take me back. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I threw away. I hope you're happy. I hope you found the family you deserved. P." I read it once. Then again. Then again. A part of me, the part that had spent 34 years loving a son who never truly loved me back, wanted to answer right away, to reach out, to try to rebuild the ashes of what we once had. But another part of me, the wiser part shaped and strengthened by 2 years of real love and respect, knew better. Some relationships can't be rebuilt. Some fractures go too deep to mend. Preston's awareness of his own mistakes was an important step for him. But it didn't erase the pain he had caused or create any obligation for me to open the door to that pain again. I deleted the message without replying. "Everything okay?" Rebecca asked as she came back from settling Jennifer in. "Everything's perfect," I said, and for the first time, I meant it in every sense. Later that morning, I stood in the garden with Elena, helping her learn the herbs by their scents while Maria worked nearby, her stethoscope tucked into the pocket of her scrubs. She was between shifts at the hospital and had chosen to spend her break helping with the greenhouse. Abuela, Elena said suddenly, tugging at my hand. "Why do the sad ladies come here? Out of the mouths of babes." I crouched down so we were eye to eye, taking in her solemn little expression. At 3, she was already remarkably perceptive, no surprise for a child raised among women healing from deep wounds. "Because sometimes," I said gently, "people get hurt by the very ones who are supposed to love them, and when that happens, they need a safe place to remember how strong they really are." Elena considered that, then nodded. "Like when I fall down and Mama kisses it better," she said. "Exactly like that," I replied, my throat tightening. "Except sometimes the hurt is on the inside, so it takes longer to heal." "But you help them," Elena said, with the unshakable certainty of a child who has only ever known safety and love. "We help each other," I corrected softly. "That's what family does." As if conjured by the word family, Sarah appeared around the corner of the greenhouse, arms full of fresh lettuce for lunch. Jennifer walked beside her, already looking a little less hollow than she had that morning. "Lunch in 20 minutes, Sarah called. "Jennifer's going to help me make soup." I watched them walk back toward the kitchen, a 70-year-old woman who had survived financial abuse from her own children, mentoring a young woman at the very beginning of her escape. There was a quiet beauty in it. Broken people helping other broken people, piecing together something whole and healthy from shared pain. That afternoon, as I often did once the day's tasks were done, I climbed the hill behind the main building to the small bench overlooking the entire property. From there, I could see all 12 cabins, the enlarged garden, the workshop where women learned job skills, the tiny playground where children like Elena could finally just be children. It was nothing like the luxury villa Preston and Evangeline had imagined. No marble, no designer furniture, no expensive artwork. Instead, there was something far more valuable: peace. The kind of deep, soul-level peace that comes from living in alignment with your values, from being genuinely useful to people who truly appreciate you. My phone buzzed again. For a heartbeat, my chest tightened, expecting another message from Preston. But this time the number was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Annette, this is Carol Williams. Dr. Valdez gave me your contact information. I'm a caseworker with Child Protective Services, and I have a mother and 2 young children who need immediate placement. Is there any way?" I smiled, already rearranging sleeping assignments in my head to make space for 3 more people who needed safety. This was how it worked now. One success story leading to another. One healed woman reaching back to guide the next. A growing web of healing and hope. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, washing the sky in pink and gold, I stayed on my bench, listening to the sounds of my chosen family preparing dinner. Laughter drifted up from the kitchen windows, mingled with the clatter of pots and the murmur of easy conversation. Preston had been wrong about so many things, but perhaps most wrong about this. These women hadn't used me and moved on. They had stayed, each in her own way. The ones who had graduated and moved into independent lives still sent photos and updates, came back with their children to visit, donated when they could, volunteered when time allowed. Our bond hadn't ended when they left the cabins. It had simply changed shape. Maria would eventually finish her nurse practitioner program and likely move away to open her own clinic, but she would always be my daughter in all the ways that mattered. Sarah would grow older and someday need care herself, but she would do so surrounded by the love she had earned through her tireless giving. Rebecca would keep teaching and guiding, passing her hard-won wisdom to each new wave of women, learning that they too were worth saving. And I would go on being what I had always been meant to be, not just a mother, but a nurturer, not just a provider, but a protector, not just someone who pours out love, but someone who finally receives it back. The mountain air was crisp and clean, scented with wood smoke and the last flowers of the season. As I rose from my bench to join my family for dinner, I realized Preston had been right about one thing. I had found the family I deserved, and they had found me. Now I'm curious about you, the one listening to my story. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever lived through something similar? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. And before you go, on the final screen, I'm leaving you 2 more stories that my viewers love, and I'm sure they'll surprise you just as much as this one. Thank you for watching until the end.